Hello friends, good evening and welcome to Super Coaching Regulatory Bodies by Testbook, and also welcome to the series of Ecologics where we are discussing the most important concepts from the economic subject which are important for the regulatory bodies examination, and wherever economics component is there, these concepts will definitely be helpful for those also. So friends, the topic that we are going to discuss is revenue receipt and capital receipt. So this is the topic that we are going to discuss today, revenue receipt and capital receipt. So बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट टॉपिक है, very important topic, revenue receipts and capital receipt, because today we will be discussing about the revenue receipts and capital receipts. Tomorrow we would be discussing about the revenue expenditure and capital expenditure, and after that we would be discussing about the deficits that you can see: fiscal deficit, revenue deficit, primary deficit, effective revenue deficit. So what are these deficits that we would be discussing after the tomorrow session, right? But for that you need to understand very clearly what is the revenue receipts, what is the capital receipts, what are the revenue expenditures, what are the capital expenditure. So today we would be covering revenue receipts and capital receipts. ठीक है, चलिए let's begin. But friends, those who are new to this series, I would like to inform them that we have started the current affairs series on our YouTube platform. So you know very well, regulatory bodies exam have multiple areas for the current affairs, which you can see: PIB current affairs, finance current affairs, RBI updates, government schemes, ESI current affairs, important reports. So we would be covering all these areas in our YouTube session. So timing you can see, schedule you can see here. So sessions are conducted from Monday to Saturday at 6 p.m. by different faculties. So you have to watch this session in order to have good command over the current affairs part for the regulatory bodies examination. Now guys, let's begin the discussion basically. So you know very well, government has the budget. ठीक है, गवर्नमेंट हर साल यहाँ पे बजट प्रेजेंट करती है, we know very well. तो जिस तरीके से हमारा खुद का बजट होता है, we also have a budget कि basically this much amount we would basically give for the grocery, this much amount we would give as a rent. So basically हमारा भी एक बजट होता है, right? So फैमिली का जिस तरीके से बजट होता है, similarly government is also having a budget. तो बजट में क्या क्या चीजें इंक्लूडेड होती हैं? गवर्नमेंट रिसीट्स एंड गवर्नमेंट एक्सपेंडिचर, सेम एज द केस with us. We also have a receipts, we also have expenditure. So government is also having the receipts and the expenditure. So different sources are there for government's receipts and expenditure. For example, if I tell you about the receipts, तो गवर्नमेंट के पास पैसा कहाँ से आता है? Whatever taxes we are paying, चाहे वो डायरेक्ट टैक्स हो चाहे वो इनडायरेक्ट टैक्स हो, दैट इज अ पार्ट ऑफ रिसीट फॉर द गवर्नमेंट, राइट? यूनियन एक्साइज ड्यूटी इज अ पार्ट ऑफ गवर्नमेंट रिसीट. GST and other taxes is a part of government receipt. Corporation tax is a part of government receipt. So कुछ set of यहाँ पे basically receipts हैं जो basically government की यहाँ पे receipt हो रही हैं. The most important thing that I would like to draw your attention here, that borrowings and other liabilities is also considered as a receipt. Reason being, पैसा तो आ रहा है, भले वो borrow करके आ रहा है, ठीक है? So keep this in mind because we would be discussing a very important thing with respect to this. So borrowing and other liabilities are also considered as a part of government receipt. Similarly, एक साइड से पैसा आ रहा है तो गवर्नमेंट पैसा खर्च भी कर रही है फॉर द वेलफेयर एक्टिविटीज. तो गवर्नमेंट के पैसा कहाँ पे जा रहा है? गवर्नमेंट इज पेइंग पेंशन टू द सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट एम्प्लॉइज. Then government is having other expenditure. Government is spending money on centrally sponsored scheme. Government is giving money as a part of finance commission and other transfer. Government is giving state share of taxes and duties. Defense expenditure is there. Subsidies are being provided by the government. So government has a set of expenditure, and also very important part, interest payment. What is this interest payment? The borrowing that government is taking. So government has to pay the interest on that, and this is the interest payment on that, right? So the thing is that ultimately government is receiving something and government is spending something. ठीक है, चलिए मूविंग अहेड. Now if I tell you about the government budget, same as we have discussed, government receipts and government expenditure, this is what we have discussed कि गवर्नमेंट के पास एक साइड से पैसा आ रहा है and that money government is spending somewhere. Now if we divide the receipt and expenditure into two parts, so that is revenue receipt and capital receipt. Similarly expenditure में भी revenue expenditure and the capital expenditure. So the thing is that money is flowing towards the government. ठीक है, पैसा गवर्नमेंट के पास आ रहा है, but that money we are dividing into two parts, that is revenue nature of money, revenue nature of receipt, and capital nature of receipt. Similarly, whatever government is spending, we are dividing it into two parts, revenue nature of expenditure and capital nature of expenditure. Now the most important thing is what is the difference between all of them. So let's begin with the government receipt first. सो गवर्नमेंट इज रिसीविंग मनी, जिसका मतलब गवर्नमेंट के पास पैसा आ रहा है, ठीक है। अब जो पैसा आ रहा है उसको हमने बाइफरकेट किया है दो कंपोनेंट में, रेवेन्यू नेचर की रिसीट एंड कैपिटल नेचर की रिसीट। फ्रेंड्स बहुत ही ध्यान से सुनिएगा, बहुत ही इंपॉर्टेंट डिस्कशन है, ठीक है। सो द थिंग इज, पैसा गवर्नमेंट के पास आ रहा है, बट उस पैसे को वी हैव बाइफरकेटेड इनटू टू पार्ट्स, रेवेन्यू नेचर रिसीट एंड कैपिटल नेचर रिसीट। सो व्हाट इज द मीनिंग ऑफ रेवेन्यू नेचर रिसीट, ठीक है। रेवेन्यू नेचर की जो रिसीट होती है, दैट इज बेसिकली नाइदर क्रिएट्स लाइबिलिटी नॉर रिड्यूस असेट, ठीक है। पैसा किस तरीके से आ सकता है आपके पास, देखिए पैसा आपके पास तीन तरीके से आ सकता है। या तो आपने कोई अपनी बेसिकली लाइबिलिटी आपने क्रिएट कर ली, मतलब आपने पैसा बोरो किया है। इफ यू आर बोरोइंग मनी देन यू आर क्रिएटिंग योर लाइबिलिटी, नंबर फर्स्ट। सेकंड, यू हैव सोल्ड योर असेट, सो इफ यू हैव सोल्ड योर असेट देन यू विल रिसीव मनी, दिस इज द सेकंड वे। एंड थर्ड, इन दोनों के अलावा पैसे कहां से आ रहे हैं, सपोज आपको सैलरी मिल रही है, आपको रेंट मिल रहा है, ठीक है, तो इसमें असेट और लाइबिलिटीज आर नॉट इन्वॉल्व, बट मनी इज, you are receiving the money, right? So this is basically the ways, but यहाँ पे when we are talking about revenue receipt, so revenue receipt में you have to remember assets and liabilities are not involved. So when assets and liabilities are not involved, still government is receiving money, so that receipt is a revenue receipt. इसको भी और डिटेल में हम समझेंगे। Similarly, when we talk about the capital receipt, so capital receipt में either capital receipt is creating liability, कैसे, जो हमने भी डिस्कस किया था कि गवर्नमेंट इज बोरोइंग, ठीक है, गवर्नमेंट इज बोरिंग, दैट वी हैव सीन। सो जो गवर्नमेंट बोरो कर रही है दैट इज अ लाइबिलिटी फॉर द गवर्नमेंट, बट सिंस दैट इज द लाइबिलिटी, गवर्नमेंट रिसीट इज बाइफरकेटेड एज कैपिटल रिसीट। सो आइदर कैपिटल रिसीट इज आइदर क्रिएटिंग द लाइबिलिटी और रिड्यूसिंग द असेट, तो या तो गवर्नमेंट ने अपना कोई असेट बेचकर वो पैसा लिया है या गवर्नमेंट ने बोरो करके लिया है, ठीक है। तो सिंपल प्रिंसिपल इज व्हेनेवर in any form of receipt, whenever in any form of receipt, if asset or liability is involved, then in that case that will be the capital receipt, ठीक है। and in any form of receipt when asset or liability is not involved, that is a part of government receipt, ठीक है। चलिए इसको डिटेल में डिस्कस करते हैं। सो इफ आई टेल यू अबाउट द रेवेन्यू रिसीट, सो व्हाट इज द मीनिंग ऑफ रेवेन्यू रिसीट, आई टोल्ड यू दैट does not create liability. So revenue receipt is a receipt that does not create liability. इसका मतलब क्या है कि वो लोन लेकर नहीं लिया जा रहा है, ठीक है। Then further that do not reduce asset also. I told you कि revenue nature का जो भी, चाहे वो expenditure है चाहे वो receipt है, उसमें assets and liabilities shall not be involved. And if assets and liabilities are not involved and government is still receiving the money, that money is basically the revenue receipt. That receipt will be the revenue receipt. So in the revenue receipt, there is no creation of liability, there is no reduction of the asset, and that is a recurring in nature. That is a recurring in nature. For example, taxes, the taxes that we are paying to the government, that is a recurring nature. हम हर साल दे रहे हैं, ठीक है, हर साल we are paying the income tax, ठीक है। जो हमारा टीडीएस कट रहा है वो हर क्वार्टर में, हर मंथ हमारा टीडीएस कट रहा है, गवर्नमेंट के पास जा रहा है। दिस इज द रिकरिंग टाइप ऑफ बेसिकली रिसीट फॉर द गवर्नमेंट। टैक्सेस हो गया, फीस हो गई, पेनल्टीज हो गई, दीज ऑल आर द रिकरिंग टाइप ऑफ ट्रांजेक्शन, रिकरिंग टाइप ऑफ रिसीट फॉर द गवर्नमेंट दैट गवर्नमेंट इज रिसीविंग। सो व्हाट आर द फीचर्स ऑफ रेवेन्यू रिसीट्स, इट डज नॉट क्रिएट लाइबिलिटी फॉर द गवर्नमेंट, इट डज नॉट रिड्यूस असेट फॉर द गवर्नमेंट, एंड इट इज अ रिकरिंग इन नेचर। सो फॉर एग्जाम्पल, इफ यू हैव एनी प्लॉट, ठीक है, इफ यू हैव एनी, सपोज इफ यू हैव एनी फ्लैट, इफ यू हैव एनी फ्लैट इन दिल्ली और आप उसको रेंट पर दे रहे हैं, ठीक है, आप उसको रेंट पर दे रहे हैं, सो यू वुड बी रिसीविंग रेंट एवरी मंथ, ठीक है, रेंट आप एवरी मंथ यहां पर रिसीव करेंगे। सो विल दैट बी द पार्ट ऑफ रेवेन्यू रिसीट और कैपिटल रिसीट? दैट वुड बी द पार्ट ऑफ रेवेन्यू रिसीट, बिकॉज यहां पे जो रेंट आप रिसीव कर रहे हैं उससे असेट या लाइबिलिटी में कोई चेंज नहीं हो रहा है, आपका फ्लैट एज इट इज है, ना ही आप कोई पैसा बोरो कर रहे हैं, ना ही आपने अपना फ्लैट बेचा है, रादर यू हैव लीज्ड आउट योर फ्लैट एंड यू आर रिसीविंग रेंट एवरी मंथ, सो दैट वुड बी द पार्ट ऑफ रेवेन्यू रिसीट फॉर यू। बट अगर आपने अपना वो हाउस, अपना वो फ्लैट बेच दिया, उसके बाद जो पैसे मिलेंगे दैट वुड बी द कैपिटल रिसीट। Got it? So same is the case with government also. Now revenue receipt can be divided into two parts. Try to understand very clearly. Revenue receipts can be divided into two parts, that is tax revenue receipt and the non-tax revenue receipt. So what is the meaning of tax revenue receipt? Tax revenue receipt is the receipt which government is receiving in the form of taxes. The taxes that we are paying, the taxes that companies are paying, the taxes that producers are paying. So basically these all are the tax revenue receipt, because we are the payer but government is receiving the same, so that would be the receipt for the government. So we have divided revenue receipt into two form, tax revenue receipt and the non-tax revenue receipt. And if you see in both the cases, there is no involvement of asset and liability, and that is why they are bifurcated as the revenue receipt. Right. So if I tell you about the tax revenue receipt, so tax revenue receipt is, for example, income tax, corporation tax, GST, excise duty, custom duty. These all are the taxes that government imposes and government collects, right? So when government is receiving these taxes, so that would be the part of tax revenue receipt. And why it is categorized as the revenue receipt? Because there is no change in the asset and liability. Got it? Second category is the non-tax revenue receipt. What is the meaning of non-tax revenue receipt? The receipts which are not in the form of taxes. For example, interest that government is receiving, the profit that government is receiving, the dividend that government is receiving, the fees that government is receiving, penalties and fines. So these all are not in the form of taxes. And if they are not in the form of taxes, then that would be the part of non-tax revenue receipt. And also why they are called as revenue receipts? Because due to this transaction, due to this receipt, there is no change in the asset and liability of the government. Got it? That is why we are saying that these are the revenue receipts. Got it? So revenue receipts are those receipts which does not include assets and liabilities. ठीक है? और साथ में basically क्या होता है? They are recurring in nature. Now moving ahead towards the capital receipts. What is the meaning of capital receipts? So capital receipts are those receipts that creates liability. Capital receipts are those receipts that create liability or that reduces asset. For example, you can see कि जो liability suppose government has borrowed, ठीक है, government ने यहाँ पे borrowing कर ली. So borrowing करने से क्या हो रहा है? Borrowing करने से definitely पैसे तो आ रहे हैं government के पास, ठीक है, पैसे तो आ रहे हैं. हम जब borrow करते हैं हमारे पास पैसे आ जाते हैं, but that is a liability which we have to repay. Similarly, when government borrows, then government has to repay in future. So, but ultimately पैसे government के पास आ गए, but liability is created here, and that is why it will be the part of capital receipt. So whenever in any form of receipt, if assets or liabilities involved, then that particular receipt will be called as the capital receipt. Similarly, it reduces asset also. Capital receipt reduces asset also. How? Suppose government के पास कोई शेयर होल्डिंग है, ठीक है, शेयर होल्डिंग है गवर्नमेंट के पास किसी पीएसयू में, फॉर एग्जांपल भेल, भारत हैवी इलेक्ट्रिकल लिमिटेड, भेल, public sector undertaking, right? Government is having shareholding in this particular organization. If government is selling the ownership, that means कि वो asset है आपके लिए. आज हमारे पास जो भी इन्वेस्टमेंट है, जो भी हम शेयर में परचेजिंग करते हैं, इन्वेस्टिंग करते हैं, फॉर एग्जांपल इफ आई एम हैविंग द शेयर ऑफ TCS, इफ आई एम हैविंग द शेयर ऑफ रिलायंस, तो मेरे लिए एक असेट है. सिमिलरली दैट इन्वेस्टमेंट इज ऑल्सो एन असेट फॉर द गवर्नमेंट. द इन्वेस्टमेंट दैट इज डन इन एनी पर्टिकुलर कंपनी इन द शेयर होल्डिंग, दैट इज एन असेट फॉर द गवर्नमेंट, राइट? सो इफ गवर्नमेंट इज सेलिंग द असेट, देन गवर्नमेंट वुड बी रिसीविंग द मनी एंड दैट वुड बी द पार्ट ऑफ कैपिटल एसेट. व्हाई दिस इज सो? क्योंकि यहां पे अल्टीमेटली गवर्नमेंट की जो असेट है वो रिड्यूस हो रही है. असेट इज रिड्यूसिंग हियर, यू कैन सी असेट इज रिड्यूसिंग हियर, एंड देन आफ्टर सेलिंग द असेट गवर्नमेंट इज रिसीविंग द मनी. सिमिलरली इन द फर्स्ट केस गवर्नमेंट इज बोरोइंग समथिंग, एंड इफ गवर्नमेंट इज बोरोइंग विच मींस लायबिलिटी इज क्रिएटेड हियर. यहाँ पे लायबिलिटी बढ़ रही है, एंड देन ओनली दीज बोथ विल बी द पार्ट ऑफ बेसिकली कैपिटल रिसीट्स. सो दे आर नॉट रिकरिंग इन नेचर. बहुत रेगुलर नहीं होता, ठीक है. आप अपनी लाइफ में कितने बार लोन लेते हैं, आप अपनी लाइफ में कितने बार असेट्स सेल करते हैं, बहुत ही रेयर होता है, ठीक है. सिमिलरली कैपिटल रिसीट्स आर नॉट रिकरिंग इन नेचर इफ वी कंपेयर दैट विद द रेवेन्यू रिसीट. अगर हम रेवेन्यू रिसीट से कंपेयर करेंगे तो वहां पे बहुत ज्यादा रिकरिंग नहीं होती. रेवेन्यू रिसीट इज अ वेरी रिकरिंग in nature, right? But when we talk about the capital receipt, so that is not recurring in nature. Got it? So this is the basic difference between the revenue receipt and capital receipt. The basic funda that I told you, whenever in any form of receipt assets or liabilities are involved, then in that case that will be bifurcated as capital receipt. And if in any type of receipt assets or liabilities are not involved, then in that case that will be the part of revenue receipt. यहाँ पे capital receipt के भी form होते हैं guys. So capital receipt के there are two types of capital receipt, that is debt creating capital receipt and the non-debt creating capital receipt. What is the basic meaning of debt creating and non-debt creating capital receipt? So look, इसका नाम क्या है? debt creating capital receipt. ऐसी receipts which are creating debt for the government. ऐसी receipts which are creating liabilities for the government. So for example, if government is borrowing loan from foreign government, if government is borrowing from international institutions, so though government is borrowing, government is receiving the money, government is having the receipt, but ultimately liability is being created here, right? Liability यहाँ पर बढ़ गई because whatever borrowing government is making right now, that has to be repaid in the future. So that is the liability. So debt creating capital receipts are those receipts which increases, which raises the liability. ठीक है, तो जहां पर भी लाइबिलिटी बढ़ रही है गवर्नमेंट की, दैट वुड बी द पार्ट ऑफ डेट क्रिएटिंग कैपिटल रिसीट्स. Another is non-debt creating capital receipts. So what is the meaning of non-debt creating capital receipts? So for example, if government has sold any asset, the example that we have taken, when government has sold any asset, then in that case that would be the part of capital receipt. Why? Because asset is reducing here and government is receiving money against it, right? So for example, loan recovery. Suppose government has given loan, government has given 100 crore rupees एज अ लोन, ठीक है, किसी को लोन दिया हुआ है फॉरेन गवर्नमेंट को, एंड गवर्नमेंट इज रिसीविंग दैट पर्टिकुलर लोन, ठीक है. जब वो लोन की रिकवरी हो जाएगी, सो यहाँ पे असेट कम होगा, क्योंकि जो लोन आपने दिया है दैट इज एन असेट फॉर यू. इफ यू वुड हैव टेकन द लोन, देन इट वुड हैव द बोरोइंग फॉर यू, इट वुड हैव द लाइबिलिटी फॉर यू, बट यहाँ पे बेसिकली आपने लोन दिया हुआ, सो दैट इज एन असेट फॉर यू, राइट. सो व्हेन यहाँ पे जब सामने वाला पर्सन पूरा लोन रिपे कर रहा है, विच मींस लोन इज रिकवर्ड नाउ, देन इन दैट केस व्हाट विल हैपन, असेट विल रिड्यूस, asset कम होगी, and then that will be the part of non-debt creating capital receipt, because this kind of receipt is not creating any liability. वो फ्यूचर में रीपे नहीं करना है उसको. So that is why it is categorized as non-debt creating capital receipts. Another example can be disinvestment receipt. I have given you the example कि गवर्नमेंट की शेयर होल्डिंग है किसी पर्टिकुलर कंपनी में, किसी पर्टिकुलर पब्लिक सेक्टर अंडरटेकिंग, राइट, एंड इफ गवर्नमेंट इज सेलिंग द शेयर्स ऑफ दैट पर्टिकुलर कंपनी, देन इन दैट केस व्हाट इज हैपनिंग, डिसइन्वेस्टमेंट इज हैपनिंग देयर. सो गवर्नमेंट जब वो शेयर सेल कर रही है बेसिकली, सो दैट इज अ बेसिकली रिडक्शन इन द असेट, असेट कम हो रहा है गवर्नमेंट का, एंड इफ असेट इज रिड्यूसिंग हियर, asset is reducing here, which means that would be the receipt, would be the part of non-debt creating capital receipt, because liability is not created here. ठीक है, यहाँ पे लाइबिलिटी क्रिएट नहीं हो रही, यहाँ पे बस असेट कम हो रही है, दैट वुड बी द पार्ट ऑफ कैपिटल रिसीट, एंड दैट टू द नॉन डेट क्रिएटिंग कैपिटल रिसीट, बिकॉज द मनी दैट गवर्नमेंट इज रिसीविंग बाय डिसइन्वेस्टमेंट, दैट इज नॉट क्रिएटिंग एनी लाइबिलिटी फॉर द गवर्नमेंट, एंड दैट इज व्हाई इट इज अ पार्ट ऑफ नॉन डेट क्रिएटिंग कैपिटल रिसीट. Right friends, so these are the very very important concept that you have to understand, because friends, when we would be discussing the deficit part, that is the fiscal deficit, revenue deficit, effective revenue deficit, primary deficit, so then you need to understand this particular concept very well. जो हमारे deficit, जो हमारे receipt वाले हैं, रेवेन्यू एंड कैपिटल रिसीट, जो हमारे बेसिकली यहाँ पर एक्सपेंडिचर वाले, दैट वी वुड बी कवरिंग इन टुमारो सेशन. तो ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है आपके अंडरस्टैंडिंग पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से. डायरेक्ट क्वेश्चंस आर आस्क्ड फ्रॉम दीस टॉपिक्स इन द एग्जामिनेशन, डायरेक्ट क्वेश्चंस आर आस्क्ड, सो यू हैव टू अंडरस्टैंड द concept very well so that you can give the answer correctly. Right, so this is all for this discussion guys. I hope you have understood the difference between the revenue receipt and the capital receipt, and also the tax revenue receipt, non-tax revenue receipt, and also the debt creating capital receipt and the non-debt creating capital receipts. If you have understood this concept, then it is very good, because that is very very important in order to understand the different deficits. Guys, do watch this session again so that you can better develop the understanding with respect to the receipts of the government. And friends, those who are preparing for RBI Grade B 2025 examination, we have launched the foundation course for them, that is Laksh batch, and as a part of foundation course we are providing things from very scratch, considering that you are completely new to the subject. So irrespective of your background, चाहे आप कॉमर्स से हो, साइंस से हो, आर्ट्स से हो, या किसी भी बैकग्राउंड से हो, हमारे लिए यू आर एन एस्पिरेंट जिसको इस सब्जेक्ट का कोई भी नॉलेज नहीं है. सो बीइंग अ टीचर, वी हैव अ माइंडसेट दैट यू आर कंप्लीटली न्यू टू दिस सब्जेक्ट, यू डू नॉट हैव एनी आइडिया with respect to this subject. So इस mindset के साथ we would be proceeding as a part of this course. So classes of phase 1 have already started. Phase 2 की classes are about to start very soon. So you can check the details that is provided in the description of this video. Link is provided in the description of video. You can check the details of the course and you can enroll it. And guys, for enrolling, you use the coupon code Prakash. After using this coupon code, you can see a drastic discount. you can see a drastic discount on the final prices. ठीक है, जैसे ही आप अप्लाई करेंगे कूपन कोड, you can see a drastic discount and that will make the course more affordable for you. And one very important thing, you have to join this telegram group. Telegram group is very very important. You have to join this telegram group. इसको join करने के बाद you can directly ask your query and I'll personally be taking care of that query. मैं उस query को personally resolve करूंगा because this is my personal telegram group. So do scan this scanner and do join the telegram group, and whatever updates are there with respect to the important sessions, with respect to the important updates regarding the information, that also I would be sharing in the group itself. So this is all for this class. I hope you enjoyed the session. I hope you have understood the concept of receipt for the government, both revenue and capital receipt, and also the bifurcation of revenue and capital receipt. In tomorrow's session, I would be discussing the expenditure part of the government. ठीक है, that is again divided into two parts, revenue expenditure and the capital expenditure. तो क्या होते हैं वो, क्या nature होता है उनका, that we would be discussing in tomorrow's class. So this is all for today's class, guys. Thank you very much. Have a good day, and we'll meet at 5:30 p.m. in our master class. So those who are new here, kindly note that we are having YouTube class at 5 p.m. the ecologic series that we are discussing right now, and second is the master class that we are having at 5:30 p.m. Both are conducted on Monday to Friday. So these are the free initiatives. So even if you are not the part of paid initiative, guys, become a part of free initiative and you can enrich your knowledge, right? So have a good day, guys. Thank you very much.